2.5 weeks.
You're good. We are not muted though, right? No. Okay. I can certainly mute. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I know I'm a bit distant, but this is Justin if you can't see me. We're just going to get started in a few minutes. We're just waiting for a few more people to move out of the waiting room and to get them connected and joined. So thank you so much for your patience. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We'll take you off mute and we can go ahead and get started. So you're unmuting. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to come hang out with us, either virtually or in person, as you can see. Today, of course, we're going to be going over the ACEC ADot pdoc subcommittee results, which I hope you'll really enjoy. There's a lot of great information here. A lot of hard work was put into this. So I hope this helps answer some questions and prompt some new questions for us. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to the group. And just to say hello, maybe we can do some quick introductions for those who are in the room while I share my screen. So thank you so much for being here. We'll be starting in just a second. Troy, begin introductions?
Yeah, Troy Siglitz with Jacobs.
Scott Sales with Parsons. Steve O'Brien with ADOT Project Management Group.
Joy Melito with WSP.
Carl Oberg, Red Sox Powell.
Jason Pinard, Burgess and Eiffel.
And I'm Greg Froelich with EPS Group.
Well, good morning, everyone. We have been looking forward to catching up with you guys on the project development on call. Like Justin mentioned, something that we've been working on for quite some time. This was an initiative that was identified out of the ACEC ADOT Partnership Committee as something of mutual interest to both the consultant industry as well as ADOT, and looking for opportunities to potentially improve the next PDOC as it's coming out for contract. If you remember a few years back when some new laws came into place or new federal rules came into play, there were some efforts similar to this where ADOT looked to the industry to get input on how to administer this contract. And over the last few years, we've been all working, under that new agreement type. And now it's time for that contract to be re-advertised. So we wanted to make sure we were doing a self-assessment of how well that went and where are the opportunities to potentially improve. So a subcommittee was formed to take on this work, and the subcommittee, just a quick introduction on that, and then I'll jump here to the agenda. But we had 3 members of the subcommittee that represented ADOT, and that is Greg Riston from ECS, Velvet Matthew from the Project Management Group, and our champion Steve O'Brien, also from Project Management Group. From FHWA, Susan Weber was a part of our group. And then from the industry, we had Jason Pagnard, Carl Ogberg, Raj Christians, and myself. So today what we wanted to hit on is reviewing some of the requirements of this on-call with you, based upon a lot of the feedback we've gotten in this process. That seemed like a good place to start with everybody. Next, we'll go through what the subcommittee has been up to, and I know we reached out to all of you for some input, so important for us to share back the findings of that input. And then lastly, we'll get into next steps with the contract. So we're gonna, each of our subcommittee members are gonna do a part of this presentation, and so Steve's gonna get us started with some of the requirements.
Okay, very good. So next slide, please. So as Joy had mentioned, we've had a project development on-call for a number of years. But there was a switch in the way we were administering that contract from 2014 to 2018. And it was pointed out to us that since at this point, there's very rarely a time when ADOT does not use federal funding as part of the design process, that we needed to make sure that our PDOC process and the way we were selecting consultants met with current requirements. And you see 2 listed here. I'm not going to go into all the details. We have asked John McLeod from FHWA to join us. So if you've got some questions about the CFR and what does it mean to be quals-based, if there's still some confusion, we can take some questions about that at the end of the presentation. But in a synopsis, our process had to modify or change to meet the Brooks Act and 23 CFR, which mainly means that every part of our process, we need to be looking at a quals-based selection. What we were doing in 2014 is we had a quals-based selection to get a list of consultants on board that we felt could help us with the types of projects we do under that contract. But we weren't taking it the next step to say, okay, which of those firms is best qualified for that particular task, that scope of work that we're trying to get out. So we modified our process in 2018, and Greg's going to go through what that process is. But the reason we did it was to be in conformance with these 2 requirements. It wasn't because we love looking at extra proposals all the time. It wasn't because we were trying to punish anybody. This is just the requirement to make sure that we were getting the best firm on board for the particular task order. And like I said, you know, I think from some of the responses we got from the survey, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there's still some confusion as to why ADOT moved in this direction. So I'm here to tell you that the reason we moved in this direction and our process is what it is. This is ADOT's process to meet the intent of 23 CFR and the Brooks Act. I'm not saying there aren't other ways that you could probably meet those requirements, but this is why we went to a task order kind of mini proposal process for every task order that we put under that contract. Next slide. So great. Go over the requirements.
So Greg, if you want to jump in. Yep.
Sure. So good morning. So as part of our requirements, as the slide states, we had to be compliant with the Brooks Act and 23 CFR. And so we compete every task order through a qualification-based selection process. You know, it is mandated by the CFR. Our version of the procurement process, procurement policy, is our manual. There is that misconception that it's just a manual. That's kind of our version of the procurement code. And so we have to have that. It is required by the CFR, and that outlines what our processes are, from anything from solicitation through the evaluation of proposals, negotiations, et cetera. So we are due for an update to that manual. That is something we are working on, and we are coordinating that with FHWA to provide some updates to make sure that we're not only compliant, but the manual is current as far as what our processes are. So as it relates to the project development on-call, the process is comprehensive. We have listed it as 5 weeks per task. I think we actually have that down to more of a 3-week process, but if you include the 2 weeks that we post projects on our website for the upcoming project list, we try to put those on there and give at least a 2-week process or 2-week time frame for those to be there so you're aware of what projects are coming. That does lead into a 5-week process. That is the opportunity for the skill preparation and advertising. That's some of the pre-work that happens. As part of the process, we do determine the selection panel composition. It is generally comprised of 3 PMG staff members, but depending upon the project, we do sometimes have other technical group involvement. If it's a bridge project, we might have somebody from bridge, environmental, you know, just the various technical groups. So that is the composition of our panel. The panel does review the statement of interest that are submitted. Those are reviewed not only for compliance, but they are then provided to the panel. The panel does review those independently of each other, but then we do convene a selection panel meeting, and that's where the scores, comments, the SOI itself are then further reviewed based on the independent review. It's an opportunity for the panel to discuss what was reviewed, how they scored, and they are given the opportunity to adjust their scores and comments based on that discussion. Nobody is requiring them to, but they do have that option. At that meeting, the scores and comments do get finalized, and the most qualified firm is selected. We have some administrative steps involved from the end of that process and the selection being announced and the debriefs being provided. It's usually a couple-day process just to make sure that as ECS that we facilitated the process per what our standard work is. We didn't deviate from that process. One thing to point out is it's not only with the PDOC, but with all of our on-call contracts that have federal funds. There is a 5-year limitation to those contracts. And we've just recently gone through an exercise with some assistance with FHWA, and where we had exceeded that 5-year limitation, and we've either moved projects to more current contracts with the same firm, or those projects that have been completed, and we're looking to close out those contracts. So again, there is a 5-year limitation, so we won't be looking to add projects as we get close to that 5-year period. And most of our contracts nowadays are a 1-year contract with up to 3 additional 1-year renewals. So technically a 4-year contract. As it states, we do prefer to renew around every 3 years. That's kind of part of the discussion with the PDOC. And we are looking to re-advertise that. Technically, the contract does state that after the third year, we're not looking to assign any new tasks. So we kind of have that wind down period, and we look to have a new contract on board. So that, I think, covers what our process is.
Okay, we're going to switch back over to a little bit more information on the subcommittee. Next slide. And so, like I mentioned earlier, this topic came out of the partnership group as a mutual concern or mutual opportunity to work together. Activities of the subcommittee really started up in March, and I'd say we pretty much met every other week between March and the end of June, recognizing that ADOT was needing to get this contract advertised this year. So that was our goal, really to stay focused on what the next project development on-call contract looked like. So we took a hard look at what was working, what wasn't working. We looked at other DOTs and how they are adhering to these rules. And then we also put out a survey to all of you to get your thoughts on the information that we had collected in that process. So we, out of that, just very quickly, you know, we felt that it would be a good opportunity to circle back with the group and share what we learned throughout this process, and then of course provide the recommendations. Some of the things that we heard from everybody about what was working and what was not, you know, the plus signs there indicate, you know, the thumbs up, what was going well. ADOT is in compliance. Lots of tasks have made it through this process, and it really has remained competitive through all of those tasks. Some of the items that we heard where there, you know, is opportunity for improvement. The process isn't necessarily well understood. You know, why are we going through this two-tier evaluation? Can it be more streamlined? Also, you know, that two-tier process takes a lot of time and resources on both sides for consultants and the agency. You know, what can we do to improve that? And then, you know, transparency and trying to work through this process and make sure that, you know, it's understood what's going on and there's good reasons why, and everybody knows that. And then lastly, you see here, sub-consultants felt somewhat at a disadvantage throughout this process as well. Then we moved to looking, okay, we know what we're doing, what are some others doing? And so the states that you see here in red are the states that we took a closer look at. And it was based on the information that we got from these other states that we developed a few different concept models that we had put out to you guys for consideration and input, you know, as to would these potentially be good models for Arizona. And so I guess at this point, I'd like to maybe pause for a second and maybe put John on the spot. If you have any additional thoughts or information at this point that you think would be beneficial to share to the group from a more broader perspective. See.
Am I back in?
You're back in, yes, John.
I got so nervous that I shut everything off. So you did put me on the spot. No, I would like, it doesn't have to happen right now, but at some point that's convenient, I would like to take 5 minutes and give a brief on the fly dissertation on the differences between the Brooks Act, 23 CFR 172, and the United States Code. which this presentation may put you to sleep, but I'll try to make it lively. It doesn't have to happen now, but I just and everything I've seen so far is great. So I've got no concerns.
Okay, excellent. Well, how about if we scoot you to the end of the presentation and we'll continue to work through what we found here. Does that work okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That would be perfect, because anybody who doesn't want to be put to sleep can leave, and then everyone who stays is going to know more about the United States Code than your closest senator.
Well, we appreciate your time and being here, and so
All right.
yeah, looking forward to it. Okay, so we'll roll on here. Okay, and with this, I am going to turn it over to Jason, and he's going to share back with y'all the survey.
Okay, thank you. So I hope most everybody here who's on this, either your firm or your organization, received the survey. A lot of effort went into that survey, and as well as the results that came from that survey. So that really guided a lot of the conversation that occurred over the last couple months towards the end as our effort closed out. So the survey was open basically second half of May, and there were three primary groups that were engaged on that front. One is this ADot ACEC partnership group. The second is if there's somebody that is not regularly attending this, but also submitted on the pdoc on the last go around, as well as ECS and PMG. And so we saw roughly half responses on that. We did see there were multiple attempts to reaching out to groups just to make sure that that everybody had the opportunity to respond. So we're going to walk through the questions here. I'm going to take the first few, then switch over to Carl. The first question: does the pdoc tax assignment selection process work well? I don't think it was any surprise, or we wouldn't necessarily be here going through this necessarily. But the response was generally no, that there needed to be changes. But it got interesting as we got into what those were. They're really more minor tweaks to the process than anything else. Next slide. So, I'm sorry, they already switched one, I looked away. Q2, please, back one. Should the same process be used now, continue in the future on-call contract? So again, similar response as the first question. Next question, please. So what improvements, if any, would you suggest? This is going to test my eyesight here. By and large, the yeses, the positive type things are posting submittals, sharing the winning SOQs or SOIs, and then modifying the process durations. And then where things were no, were the evaluation criteria, the contract value, and just in general, no changes. So that gives a pretty good understanding or a perspective on the tweaks to the process, use my word, to what really is how things move forward. Next slide, please. And then the next question here is basically how many firms should be on the list. And so there's a lot of discussion internally amongst this group as well as the survey. And by and large, the overwhelming response is back about the same as what it is currently, 20 firms.
All right, thank you, Jason. So the next two questions that were asked are a little bit more intense. And the way that I want to explain how we came up with the weighting on this is that, of course, we had about 16 individuals that responded to the different alternatives. And then what we did is we created a point system associated with if your first choice was worth 5 points, your second choice was worth 4 points, so forth and so on. So then you take the total points and then divide it by the responses, and that's how we came up with the certain rating that you're going to see here in a second. So question number 5 was a very interesting question, and this is where we started seeing some differences between the first 4 questions and then the next 2. So we created these different alternatives. Alternative 1 was the current process with some changes. Alternative 2 was no on-call, just advertise everything. The third alternative was pre-qualifications list, instead of utilizing an on-call selection, just if you're pre-qualified. The fourth was pre-qualification list and waves. So I don't know if that was like 10 firms, 15, you know, just doing projects and like number of projects. So, and then the last one was current process with only 10 firms for a shorter term. So currently we have, there's 20 firms have been selected on the 2018 contract, and prior to that, in 2014, you had 20 firms as well. So there was discussions about going 10 and 10 and maybe splitting the time. So as you can see by these alternatives, alternative one was the current process with some minor changes, ranked the highest. And then you guys are smart enough to see which second, third, fourth, and fifth. What was interesting is when we got into question 6. So where do you rank the current pdoc process compared to other organizations that are federally compliant? Well, one of the first things that I learned is that a lot of us that answered these questions don't really understand which ones are federally compliant. For example, they need to have certification acceptance. So in reality, there's only one other organization that is as certified for utilizing an on-call for design services with federally funded money, and that is MCDOT. The fully certification organizations is MCDOT, Chandler, Mesa, Pima County, and Tucson. The partial certifications with no design authority, by the way, is Scottsdale, Tempe, and Phoenix. So, you know, when we look at this bullet number 1, it's pretty low. Other government agencies within the state, MCDOT, Pinal County, City of Phoenix, Town of Gilbert, City of Tempe, etc., all use their on-call list to produce consultants that have been complete federally funded task orders. That is incorrect. So wherever that answer came from. So we just wanted to dig a little bit deeper and to understand some of this. Their on-calls do not require consultants to recompete for each task order like the PDOC, and they use this for all size projects, okay, even exceeding 500K. The average was some being better than some and some worse. And then out of 50 states, Arizona is the only state compliant with ADOT interpretation of the Brooks Act, which we are so happy to have Mr. McAvoy available, because we went right to the top to have some of these questions from you folks and from our committee answered. Additionally, ADOT's process seems like more work than others. I think we all agree to that. Even ADOT agrees to that. I mean, we hear that from Mr. O'Brien. We hear that from Greg Riston. We hear that from Velvet. I mean, it isn't like ADOT wants to have to review these, you know, a bunch of SOIs. So if you go to the next one, oh, you gotta go back one because there's two slides. So additionally, although it is compliant, it is tedious compared to other states. Okay, so that was a good question and a good comment. So what we did is what Joy mentioned is we looked at other states, and it was very eye-opening at how many states are not really in compliance. So where do we rank the current PDOC compared to other federally compliant? Someone said in the top 10 to 20%. I mean, I always like being in the top 10 to 20% of my state. Some said in the middle, and then just different comments that you guys can read yourself. So where does that take us? The survey results. So utilize the same PDOC process with the following changes. And as Greg Riston spoke about just recently, increase the time durations. They already did that. What was really amazing about this committee, the subcommittee, is that ADOT wasn't waiting for all the answers from everybody or all the questions. So what they did is they started moving forward as quick as possible with getting information out there. So I personally appreciate that from ADOT. And then provide the names of the firms submitted as part of the debrief. So I think that's fantastic, and that's what a lot of people requested. For the next contract, this is a good one. They're going to increase the individual task order threshold from 500 to 750. That helps a lot. And then the winning SOI will be shared. So they are going to continue to select 20 consultants as in the past, and we will be, provide more information about all these requirements. Hence, John McAvoy. With that, our next slide is just the next steps. So
I
Joy,
think there's one more slide.
one more slide.
Yeah, so
Am I
maybe
supposed to-
Steve can buzz through this, and then
Sure.
we'll turn it over to John.
So just to let everybody know on the call, like we said, we did meet often because we are at a time when we want to put out our next pdoc contract. So ADOT is committed to the next advertisement will be sometime in Q2. And we're committing that we will have the selected firms under contract by no later than the end of Q4 of this fiscal year. So those are things you can put on your calendars. We feel this is important to get done in this time frame for the reasons Greg was talking about. We don't really want to start new task orders, beyond our third year. We run into some potential issues on post-design services if we do that. This will allow us to start utilizing a new contract with the beginning of the fiscal year. And as part of that, just so everyone understands that, and Greg mentioned this, that we are having to update the ECS manual to reflect the changes that we just talked about.
So with that, any questions?
I'm sorry, were you asking that of me?
I think generally the group first, and then we'll turn it over to you, John.
Oh, good. That's for the best.
If I can offer, just so I don't get a whole bunch of phone calls and emails, point of clarification, we are looking to release as part of the debrief, as it states, those are the changes we're looking to make now. I don't think any of those on the most recent ones have gone out, but we are looking to do that here very shortly. So we will be providing that information. So I still want to be thinking, well, I haven't seen anything or received anything. We are doing that. We're not going to wait for the new on-call, but we just haven't had an opportunity to really fine tune that step in our process. But we will very shortly.
I guess I have a question in the future ones. If you don't submit on one of the tasks, would you also be able to get information on who submitted or who won on that? Or do you have to submit to get the information?
I thought we mentioned that you have to submit.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how we had talked about it. Yeah.
Okay. And Susan, thank you. You're right. It is Pima County. I'm sorry, but one of the responses on here was Pinal County. So the Pinal County is not CA, fully design authority CA.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no questions, let's turn it over to John.
Good job, guys.
And there we go. First of all, who wants to hear a little story about who I am? Is anybody interested? Okay.
I am.
Susan, you know this. Federal highway people love to talk about themselves. So let me just so you know who I am. And next time we're in an AASHTO meeting somewhere, you can introduce yourself and I can introduce myself, just so you know who I am. I'm John McAvoy. I've been with Federal Highway for 20 years. Before I was with Federal Highway, I worked for a consultant engineer in the central Connecticut area. I'm a graduate of the University of Connecticut. And so I did about 15 years as a consultant and then had an opportunity to take a position in Federal Highway in Connecticut. Jumped at the opportunity. That was, like I say, 20 years ago. I worked in the Connecticut division office for a few years before I went to the Rhode Island division office. And I was like Susan, I was one of those area engineers where you kind of had your hands in a little bit of everything. When I went to Rhode Island, I was a project manager for a major project called the relocation of Interstate 195, which in Providence, Rhode Island, took 195 that wound through the middle of downtown Providence and moved it to the outskirts of town. And from that, I went to the Oregon Division Office in Salem, Oregon, to help with the replacement of the Interstate 5 bridge over the Columbia River that was called the Columbia River Crossing Project. Complete failure, that project, but I like to think that maybe not so much because of me, but despite me. A few years ago, I moved to headquarters, where I am now the Consultant Services Program Manager in Washington. I do not sit in Washington. I sit in my home back in Connecticut. So I'm joining you from the East Coast, where today we're under a deluge of rain. So hopefully my internet connection holds. Okay. Any questions about me or anything? Because I got just a couple thoughts that I want to share. But let me just say, any questions so far for me? Okay. I just want to comment that the level of attention that is evident to me that you all have spent on this process is I understand that sometimes maybe the process isn't exactly what you like, but I think if everybody knows what the process is, understands why the process is the process, I think it helps. If you indulge me, I would like to take just a couple minutes to explain what regulations you're working under. And everything you said is true, but what I'd like to do is start with the regulation that's closest to everything that you're trying to do right now, and that is 23 CFR standing for the Code of Federal Regulation, Section 172. That covers the procurement, management, and administration of engineering and design related services. That's the regulation that you want to go to when you're asking yourself or Susan the question, are we doing this right? That's where you want to go. It's based on law that we are saddled with, we're burdened with, we're required to follow, that we're calling the Brooks Act. Now, the Brooks Act is a federal law. It's not a regulation. It's a federal law, and that law was written by Congress. When Congress writes laws, they put it in not the Code of Federal Regulations, but United States Code. All right, so you're going to see a lot of references to 23 USC or 23 CFR. Recognize that if it's USC, that stands for United States Code, that was written by Congress, and that Congress is part of the legislative branch of government, right? Going back to our 5th grade social studies class, there's 3 branches of government, and they're all working checks and balances with each other. I work for the President of the United States, and we are in the executive branch. So I don't have any ability to go into United States Code and change anything in United States Code. Only Congress can do that. All right. So 50 years ago, Congress got together. There's this guy by the name of Tom Brooks in Texas, and he wrote a law that said, well, let's look at it. Is there a way that I can share my screen? I mean, does somebody have to share it for me, or can I do it myself?
I think if you look at the bottom of your screen, for us, it's a green button, share screen.
Do it.
Yeah, we got it.
Let me see it now.
Yes.
There we go.
Okay. First piece of guidance. If y'all want to, the best repository for information is this website here, govinfo.gov. This is where you get all the Federal Register notices, United States Code, and the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, under the United States Code, and we talk about the Brooks Act hasn't changed in 50 years. It was written 50 years ago. No one's ever done anything about it. This appears in Title 40. Now, every government has its own title. List that Title 23 here is highways. The Brooks Act does not appear under the guidance of highway. It appears on Title 40, got to do with public buildings, property, and works. So when the government is going to build a new courthouse,
Hey,
yes,
John,
sir.
John, because you're sharing your screen now, we're losing you. John.
Yeah, John, your connection is spotty.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, I think because you're losing or you're sharing your screen, we're losing your audio capability. You're sharing your screen and we're getting echo.
All right.
I'm actually losing the audio on everybody right now.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'll just bring you the word. So Congress writes this law called the Brooks Act that says it establishes the policy of the government. When they hire an architect, when they hire an engineer, they do so with a transparent process that considers the demonstrated qualifications of the architect or engineer, and they negotiate a price that's fair and reasonable. That establishes the policy. The Brooks Act is found under Title 40. Title 23, United States Code 112, which has to do with highways, says, oh yeah, we like that. We're going to incorporate that into the federal highway program. All right. So when we talk about the Brooks Act, the Brooks Act really isn't really what we're concerned with, because what we've done is we've taken 23 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR 172, and wrote what we believe Congress's intent was with the Brooks Act. Okay, so if you comply with 172, 23 CFR 172, then you are complying with the Brooks Act, because we, Federal Highway, myself, and the people in headquarters wrote the regulation to implement what Congress's intent was with the Brooks Act. And we put a lot more definition on it. Now, the one thing that I want to point out to you is in the Brooks Act, and this is where I kind of, when sharing my screen, I was going to show you the language. But if you were to go to 40 USC, United States Code, paragraph 1103, part C, you'll see something there that says, and I'll just read it to you real quick. And this is going to answer all your questions, as opposed to talk about competing and whatnot. And if you, I have to increase the size of it. Okay, it says, for each proposed project, the agency's head shall evaluate current statements of qualifications and performance data on file with the agency, together with statements submitted by other firms, blah, 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 blah. So that part of the Brooks Act gets incorporated into 23 CFR 172.9. And this is where we say for every contract, for every proposed project, you have to have a qualifications-based selection. When you do an on-call services contract or your pdoc contract, when you select those 20 consultants, you're selecting 20 qualified consultants, but you have not considered the qualifications of those consultants for a proposed contract, for a proposed project. When you identify a task, that's when you have the project. That's when you go to those 20 consultants and you say, who is the most qualified consultant for this task? Because we identified now what the scope is going to be for this task. That's the key to understanding why we have this two-step process, right? First, there's this, and I don't want to use the word competition. There's this evaluation out of all the firms that are interested in doing work for the Arizona DOT for this type of job category, let's say bridge rehabilitation. The DOT will select 20 firms to be on call, right? So don't look at that as the competition. That's an evaluation. Next is the competition. The competition comes when you've identified a task and you're comparing the task against the strengths of those 20. Now, here's where you could save some time if you're Arizona DOT. You don't have to do a formal RFP for that task. And I know Susan's been working on this with you for a while now. You have to do evaluation. You have to do a qualifications-based selection at this phase, but it doesn't have to involve a formal RFP. There could be other things you can do, and the regulations don't say what they have to be. The regulations say that you have to do a qualifications-based selection, but it doesn't say what that qualifications-based selection has to be. So you can design something that works for you. Now, of course, if there are people who think that that is not a suitable, whatever you decide to do is not suitable, then we can talk about that, right? So are there any questions about that part of it right now? Because I feel as though we went over a lot of stuff just then.
Yes.
So, John, excuse me, I'm going to bring up one thing that we talked about is with regards to what you just spoke about with not necessarily issuing a formal RFP for each task. One of the things that has been discussed and that I've talked about with you actually, and I'd like you to kind of clarify for the group. One of the methods other states used is that the project manager will select 3 to 5 consultants from the on-call list and will approach them as far as getting additional information from them about the specific project, and then we'll select from that 5. I'd like you to clarify what works for that type of process and what doesn't. Because I think there are some places where, or some concerns that we have where out of 20 consultants, it would be the same 5 or 6 or 7 consultants always getting the work, as opposed to all 20 of them having the ability to say, yes, we're interested in this project.
Well, let me ask you this, Susan. Why would you not request feedback from all 20? Why just pick 3 or 5?
Well, that's kind of my question to you is, we know that some states would do that, and we have talked. I've talked with you about that, and
okay.
We're concerned that it would limit the competition for each task as opposed to opening it up.
Okay, so Susan, you and I have talked, and I think you understand where I'm coming from. I like to think of myself as a problem solver, not a problem finder, right? So to the degree that there are states out there that are doing it the way you describe, I don't want to know who those states are, but I would encourage those states to keep the process wider open and not self-select those 3 to 5, because I think if you the whole purpose of the on-call is to streamline. Purpose. That's a misstatement. One of the benefits of on-call is the ability to streamline the consultant selection process. You've taken all the possible consultants that are interested in doing work for the state of Arizona, and you've narrowed it down to 20 for this type of work. Like I say, maybe you're going to have a PDOC for bridge rehab. Maybe you have another one for geometric design. Maybe you have another one for emergency culvert repair. Maybe you have another one for landscaping. Maybe you have another, right? So you can do many of these different job categories. And I think just leave it at that. So once you've gotten your consultants in each one of those categories, I think, I'm trying to be careful with my words. Why would you not give all 20 of them an opportunity to decide for themselves whether or not they want to compete for this task that we've identified, right? So let's do that.
Let me just say that's our approach. If we've got 20 firms that are qualified to do this work, we're going to leave it up to those 20 firms if they want to submit on that task order or not. Now, some choose, maybe they're too busy or don't want to go after that task order, that's fine. But we open it up to everybody, and that's how we're going to continue.
Yeah. Excellent. Again, I'm not trying to, go ahead.
So John, I have a question. So I love where you're going with a lot of this, because the 20 firms that are selected for the PDOC follows the 23 CFR 172.9. Then I love how ADOT allows each of the firms to decide if they want to chase after certain tasks. But what is the minimal requirements do you think the ADOT or any other state should have when they're asking questions about if you're interested in those tasks?
Well, I think what you have to do is write a request for information, or I don't know what you call it in Arizona, a request for qualifications, a request for information. Every state calls it something else. But I think you'd have to put enough information in that solicitation. Again, doesn't have to be a formal RFP, but in that solicitation, so that the firms can respond, and you'll be able to gauge the strength of the firm with the critical element of the task, right? Because every bridge rehab, one could be over water, one could be over railroad, one could be over I-10, another one could be over a local road, where each one of the elements are going to be we can identify what the critical element is going to be. If you have a bridge that's over a body of water that's a critical habitat for something, and you're going to say, well, we need somebody who's being able to rehab this bridge without going in the water, without touching the water. Well, that's maybe a specialty design that's of that 20, maybe 5 or 6 of them have done that before. And so now you give everyone an opportunity to respond to this RFP, but you're going to be focusing on the firms that have done that thing before. Working over, I-10 is different than working over a local road, or I-10 over a local road is different than over some other element, right? So I think that's the thing that you want to do is write a task scope that highlights the critical element, so that you can look at the firms of those 20 firms who has the most experience addressing that critical element, right? I think that's the way to go about doing that. Is that helpful?
Yeah, and that's pretty much what ADOT's been doing with they're called SOIs. So.
Okay, statement of interest, right? Okay. Yeah, every state calls that something different. Again, I think you're doing it the right way. Let me ask you all a question, just to kind of help clarify myself. let's say, and I pulled up my map of Arizona so I can speak intelligently, somewhat intelligently. But let's say we were looking for a consultant to do a bridge rehab of North 31st Avenue over I-10, right? Now that's a big bridge, right? Is that something that you'd go to your on-call services contract to get a consultant for that sort of thing? Or is that something that you'd put out as a standalone project-specific RFP?
In general, that would be a standalone specific RFP. And then anyone who responded to RFP could. It wouldn't go out through our PDOC.
Right. Okay.
Project for that. And that's why we would, and in fact, you know, in the urban areas, a lot of our urban projects, we still advertise those all as standalone projects.
Got it.
The size of the projects, the complexity, and those kind of things.
Right. Okay. That gives me a very good understanding of what Arizona DOT is doing. I know there's another state that their entire design program, consultant design program, is all on call, and it kind of, they run into some trouble when you have a major project like that. Oh, and not a major project may have a different nomenclature, but you have a big project, a complex project in an urban area like that. So they're running into trouble with their timeframes because this on call have got these timeframes that it's tough to do a project from you know, project development through construction and construction inspection and management in the time frame that an IDIQ or an on-call contract allows. And I keep saying, well, you know, there's an opportunity to do a project-specific contract where it could be amended for whatever the length you need. But you know, that particular state has trouble getting consultants on board, going through their state process, and the IDIQ helps them do that, but they end up running into these problems with the time frame. So, all right, I appreciate that feedback. Anything else that you have a question with?
I don't have a question, but just a comment. I want to thank you for joining us today, because some of the comments we got back on our survey, there was still, I could tell, a lot of folks didn't quite understand why ADOT had switched their process and were doing what they were doing. And, you know, a lot of the comments come back, well, you know, I work for Missouri DOT and we don't have to go through any of this. And all I say to those folks, well, at Arizona, we're going to be fully compliant with the regulations. And this is our process. And we've found and we've asked that it is compliant. Just in fact, when we started this whole thing, I told Susan, I said, I'm not here to get other states in trouble when we start looking at their processes. We're not the tattlers or anything, but just for your edifice, I think there are a lot of things happening in other states that you know, and consultants, you know, are national. A lot of our firms are national, and so they aren't having to go through some of the same things that we do here in Arizona. And I think that adds some confusion to folks, you know, how one state can do something and another says, no, we can't do it. So I appreciate you getting on and trying to help, you know, demystify regulations and what you can accomplish here. So appreciate your time today, John.
Well, I will say it again. I like to think I'm a problem solver, not a problem identifier, right? So like you, I'm not interested in getting other states in trouble either. I can tell you that I've had these conversations with Don Perkins in Missouri, and we are addressing some of the things that Missouri has been doing for the last 20 years. just as for another piece of information is when these regulations, 23 CFR 172 has been around forever. The regulations were updated in 2015. The previous time before that, I think it was around 2002. And so one thing that we did do in 2015, the reason why we updated them is because we had a review done by our internal, it's called the Inspector General, did a report and said that we needed more definition on this IDIQ. And so and the recommendation that they made to us was that we rewrite the regulations to include more information on IDIQ. So we did it because the people with badges and guns told us to do it. So, when someone has got a badge and a gun, you do it. And so that's where the new regulations came from. And they had to go they had to go through our Inspector General, they had to go through our chief counsel's office. So, I'm like, I don't get a kick out of imposing new regulations. I'm kind of the person that thinks that the more money that we can get on the ground in addressing our infrastructure, the better off we're going to be. So I try not to make a lot of regulations myself. The key here is that, the policy we're trying to enforce is that we broadcast widely our need for an engineer. We make that selection based on demonstrated qualifications, and that we're fair in the negotiation, fair to the state DOT, fair to the federal government where the money is involved, and fair to the consultant. The consultant is a for-profit agency. They're not a charity. They're entitled to make a profit. So if we're fair and open and transparent, then people can understand that we're all trying to do the right thing and get the money into the infrastructure as quickly as possible, because that's where we get the most bang. So that's what I'm trying to help you do. And I like you say, I'm not interested in tattling on any state, but I will say this, and some of those counties and local agencies that you were talking about that may or may not be compliant, all I can say is I'm not going to be tattling, but I can say this. The federal highway program is a reimbursement program. It's not a grant program, although we're giving out more grants these days. And with the new highway bill that's coming, don't tell anybody, but there's going to be a lot of grant programs in there. But we're basically a formula program that is a reimbursement program. So the DOT goes ahead and spends all the money, and then they come back to federal highway and say, will you reimburse us for this expenditure that we had? And we always say, oh, yes, of course. But if you're not being compliant with some regulation and someone gets worried about this, there's always a possibility that federal highways will say, we can't reimburse you for this because it didn't follow our regulations. There's always that chance. Unless you're compliant, then there's no chance. But so you look at some of these agencies, these local agencies that don't have the money, that can't take the hit. If they're spending if they're counting on federal dollars, but they spend their own money up front in a non-compliant way, then they risk not getting reimbursed. And that could be a real problem for somebody. I'm not going to be the one making that call, but somebody could make that call, and you run that risk if you're not playing by the rules. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you very much, John, for all those insights. It's very helpful. And thank you all for joining in the call today. And I want to say a special thank you to the champions of this committee, Justin and Steve. Appreciate you guys guiding us through all this and making it happen.
And I wanted to say thank you to the whole committee for the time commitment. This was important. It was good to get our process transparent and make sure what we're doing is the best that we can do in Arizona. I think that was the input. Just everyone on the call, I entered into this thing thinking we'd be doing something different. And it was good to get the feedback from the industry that they feel that the process is working. It needs some minor tweaks, but that overall it's a fair process. So I appreciate all the time and effort everyone put in on this, and I'm glad to see that we've also come to a conclusion. We started something and we've got it finished. That always makes me happy.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo what Steve said too. I want to thank everybody, and I especially want to thank ADOT and the consultants for keeping an open mind through this whole process, and going along with all the things that they and I learned about compliance with the whole process. It was a learning experience for me. It was a learning experience for everybody. And I think we came through it with flying colors, and I really applaud everybody's efforts and their time commitment.
That was awesome.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, John and Susan, for providing your perspectives. Susan, all the way along the way. And John today, very insightful. Always great to hear it directly from the source. So thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your time. Looks like it's about lunchtime, so go grab something to eat. And we'll see you back here for the next ACEC meeting. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Push for the infrastructure transportation bill to be increased to the House. So I got a question. HERF money is utilized by